International Development Minister Ahmed Hussein finally announced today that Canada is resuming funding to the United Nations Relief Agency for Palestinians, and that the Canadian government will provide additional funding to other agencies that are airdropping desperately needed supplies to Gaza. Bob Rae is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, and he joins me now. Ambassador Rae, it's good to speak with you again.
Good to speak to you.
When we last spoke, you said you were waiting on the findings of a report ordered by the Secretary General of the United Nations on UNRWA, and those findings would determine what Canada does. Have you received in full that report? Is that why you're reinstating the funding? What assurances do you have that everything will work properly from here on out?
Well, we received an interim report. The interim report stated that there were some discrepancies between the information provided by the Israeli government and other information, and that there needed to be more work, but that they still had not had an opportunity to talk directly to the Israelis because the Israelis had not responded to the request for a meeting. So I think what's happened is that the government has, together with a number of other governments, including the EU, who made a major announcement last week, have decided that there's enough in place now at the UN in terms of looking at what happened on October 7th, but also, more importantly, the overall structures in place with respect to UNRWA, that we're satisfied that we can go forward. And that's what the minister announced today. And I think it's in keeping with what we need to do. We're obviously continuing to work with a number of countries and allies and others about how we go forward even further. But we just think that the humanitarian situation on the ground is so dire and the situation is so serious that we cannot plan our activities with respect to responding to all the requests for funding that we're receiving without also recognizing that UNRWA plays a very important coordinating role. And I think everybody's agreed on that, and I think that's the direction we're going to go.
Okay, some discrepancies, and they still haven't been able to speak to the Israelis. Can you give us any more insight into what the discrepancies were and why Israel, which has made this allegation, hasn't yet spoken to investigators because there's been criticism they haven't also shared evidence with donor countries?
No, I can't. I can only tell you, David, that we received an 8-page report. That's not a public document because it's an interim report. I was given an opportunity to read it, and I conveyed the information that I found in it to the government. But I think the overall situation on the ground is really what's driving all of us to feel that you look at airdrops, you look at the port announcement last night from President Biden. Everybody is looking at whatever can we do to increase the flow of aid. But the key reality is that the flow of aid really goes through a number of entrances to Gaza, which are controlled by the Israelis, that we have to take steps to make sure that the goods are getting through and that they're getting to the people. And frankly, that just right now is not happening at the pace that it needs to, which is one of the reasons why we've been so strongly supportive of a humanitarian ceasefire in order to allow us to get goods and also allow us to get the hostages out. And those are things that all need to happen. But to say that we will not give a nickel to UNRWA in the current circumstances would be doing a huge disservice to the people who are starving. And the government of Canada has no intention of doing that.
Okay, so you've read this 8-page report, and obviously it's confidential, so you can't tell me what is in it. But how would you describe it? Is this an exoneration of UNRWA from the allegations?
No, it's not an exoneration of anybody. It's an establishment of some critical facts in terms of the timing of what happened. But it is most important to stress that we're not going to get to a bigger picture with respect to UNRWA's structure until we have this final report, until we have the report from the former French Foreign Minister, Minister Colonna, who's been asked to do a report by the Secretary General. And overall, I think an additional audit that's being performed by the EU and that will inform all of our activities. So we're taking the steps to deal with the situation when it comes to the accountability of UNRWA. But everybody also has to think about the situation on the ground. And we can't deal with this situation without the humanitarian structures that we have in place at the present time. And we can't change horses in midstream. We have to deal with the extent of humanitarian catastrophe. We're coming close to a report on famine, which will be produced by the UN very, very shortly. And we know that what it's going to say is dire. And so we have to respond to the seriousness of that. And that's why the government is making its decisions. We've not taken this decision lightly. We've been reviewing carefully how to get it done. But we also wanted to signal to everyone that we don't see how in the near term, how we can do anything effectively to get aid to people without the full cooperation of UNRWA and without the full cooperation of the government of Israel. And we need both those things. And to turn this into a political standoff is a mistake. It has to be something where all the agencies in all the countries in the region are working together to deal with the humanitarian situation. A ceasefire, release of the hostages right away, getting the aid to the people, and trying to take the politics out of this as much as we can.
Okay, so no exoneration for UNRWA, but does that mean there's a finding of wrongdoing here, or is it just incomplete at this point?
Not at all. There's no finding of wrongdoing. I think it's important to stress that. This was a report about the evidence around the 12 people. And what the report basically said was the issue is there's nothing to indicate that there had been any prior issue with any of those 12 people, and there's nothing to indicate that there's any involvement by the management or the leadership of UNRWA in any wrongful activity, nothing at all. And so I think it's important that that be understood. The report couldn't do either without getting a full dose of the information from the government of Israel. And that's the information that people are still waiting for and that we still haven't received.
So do you have an updated timeline on when this will be complete? Any idea?
Well, we're hoping that there's going to be a meeting soon with the government of Israel. We hope the meeting will be sufficiently fulsome to allow the investigators to do their full job. And once that's done, I think we'll be in a better position to look at that. But there's also the report of the French former foreign minister of France, who's going to be doing a longer report. That won't come out until April. The point is, we don't have until the end of April to deal with the extent of the humanitarian problem. We don't have the luxury of time here.
There's undoubtedly going to be some backlash to this, right? You've seen the political reaction here, and certainly Jewish groups and even some members of the Liberal caucus, Anthony Housefather, Marco Mendicino, saying this is the wrong decision when news of this got out. So if this isn't an exoneration of UNRWA, which is what people would say would be required to take this decision, how would you describe this? You've just gotten to a level of comfort with where the facts are now, or is it solely because the humanitarian situation is so bad you can't wait for the full fact-finding to be complete?
I think it's the two reasons that I've given. And I respect the people who disagree with us. I would plead with all of them, who are my friends and many groups that I've been meeting with over many, many years. I would plead with them to understand the dire nature of what is taking place in Gaza. You have hundreds of thousands of people who have nowhere to live. You have people who have no access to food, no access to water. We cannot afford to get into political arguments at a point where we're dealing with such a serious humanitarian situation. And the other thing is, we are taking steps, and not only the donor countries, all the donor countries, whether the donor countries are among the countries that are funding or the donor countries who have suspended, we are, all of us, taking the steps to deal with the accountability that's necessary. If there was any involvement, as Secretary General said to me last week, he said, if there are any people working with UNRWA who have a direct connection to Hamas, they will be dismissed and they will be fired. We need the information from Israel to get us going on that score. So let's look at the situation as a humanitarian crisis, and let's understand that everybody who's working in this field is firmly against terrorism, is firmly against attacks on Israel, and we are all working together to get to a place where the humanitarian situation in Gaza can be relieved. is not a decision any of us have taken lightly. We have taken it after great consideration about where the priority has to be. The priority has to be with solving a humanitarian crisis.
Bob Rae, another issue that is a humanitarian and security crisis is the situation right now in Haiti, with gangs taking over even larger parts of the capital, issues outside the Canadian Embassy being closed right now. You're going to a meeting in Jamaica on Sunday to discuss the situation there. What can you tell us about what the international response might be?
Well, the CARICOM community, which is the Caribbean leaders, are meeting. They've asked Canada to join in the meeting together with a number of other countries who've been major donors and obviously have a major connection with Haiti to join in this meeting in Kingston. There have been a lot of talks underway among the political parties in Port-au-Prince. Our ambassador there has been very closely involved. I've been on the phone with him this morning. And there's a lot of steps that we need to take together to get to a path towards stability and a path towards an election. But right now, the violence is very, very serious. The gangs have taken over much of Port-au-Prince and other parts of the country. So we have to move forward together. And that's what we're going to try and do.
Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, David. Good to talk to you.
Diana Sarosi is the Director of Policy, Campaign and Communications at Oxfam Canada, and she joins me now. Diana, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oxfam was one of many humanitarian groups that had said UNRWA was the main aid provider for the people in Gaza. I wonder what your reaction to the news today that Canada is reinstating its funding.
Of course, we're very relieved by that decision. As we have said before, there's no one else who can replace UNRWA on the ground. It has the networks, it has the over 800 shelters where people are desperately trying to find some access to humanitarian aid. So we were very, very concerned about the situation with UNRWA, and so this is good news today.
Help me understand that a little bit, because you know how controversial UNRWA has been, and you know what the critics have said about it and its links and sympathy for Hamas. Others argue that the money should go to other groups who can build the capacity and fill that gap. Some aid groups say that's just not possible. How do you view it? What makes UNRWA so indispensable despite the criticism of it?
Yeah, I fully agree. It is not possible to bring up the capacity of other organizations to the level that UNRWA has. It's been operating there for decades. Most of the staff are Palestinian. None of our organizations have this level of reach and human resources available to provide this level of humanitarian aid. We have to remember that even before October 7, 80% of the population was reliant on humanitarian aid for decades. And so, they have the structures in place. They basically provide what any normal other state would provide: the hospitals, the schools, any sort of public services. And so, yeah, there's no way any other organization could take up that space.
Right, so it's not just delivering aid, it's essentially functioning as a quasi-government and as a civil service inside Gaza itself.
Exactly, yeah.
So we spoke to Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae, about this today. He says this decision is based on the early findings of a report from the UN. It's not a vindication of UNRWA, he says, but neither is it a conviction of UNRWA. It's a process that's going to take too long, and they want to do this because the humanitarian need is so great. What are your colleagues on the ground telling you about the situation in Gaza right now?
It is horrendous. We've really reached catastrophic levels of hunger in Gaza. People don't know where their food comes from, where the next cup of water will come from. They're literally drinking out of toilets. They're eating wild plants. They're using animal fodder to try and make some bread. This situation is really, really desperate. And we've been raising the alarm bells on the level of starvation and famine that we're seeing right now. We're particularly concerned about the situation in northern Gaza, where about 300,000 civilians are left and haven't had access to humanitarian aid in 4 months. That's a really long time to go without any food or water, and really just going with whatever you can find on the street. One of our partners who is still operational in the north just last week told us, about the level of malnutrition they're seeing among children. They're really at severe levels of wasting and malnutrition, and in a life-threatening state that really requires hospitalization and feed programming to keep them alive. And we've all seen the photos now of these children starving to death. So yeah, the situation is absolutely desperate, and people can't wait another day for a ceasefire, an end of the hostilities, for the borders to open, and for humanitarian aid that is just kind of stuck there at those crossings to finally get in.
Yeah, the trucks can't get in, and the need is great, and Canada and other nations are now turning to the air to try to get supplies. And Canada announced today it will join Jordan and the World Food Program in aid dropping in air, which is not as efficient, obviously, as trucks going in. And we've seen reports today of parachutes failing and crates of aid or boxes of aid killing people waiting for it down below. What's Oxfam's sense of this approach to getting around the slow delivery by truck?
Well, obviously it's well-intentioned, and we're very we welcome all countries to try and find solutions to the desperate humanitarian situation inside Gaza. But there are way more cost-efficient and faster solutions, which is to open those border crossings. At all of them, hundreds of trucks are lined up who are ready to deliver aid. We have one truck, 2 shipments of water and sanitation equipment that we sent in December, and it's still queuing at the border. A lot of the inspections that are happening of the aid trucks, like it's really a really chaotic situation in the sense that we're not able to track where our shipments are going, what is being rejected, where it's going. We really have to rely on authorities to get the things in. And then the other challenge is that beyond Rafah, you can't really deliver any of the aid. And so, that's why we're seeing a lot of people now lined up at the beach, desperately trying to get some of what is being dropped. But it is literally a in the bucket. It would take hundreds and hundreds of airplanes to deliver what the trucks outside the crossings can do.
So the other option is by sea. And President Biden last night in the State of the Union address said the U.S. military is going to try to build a temporary port on the beaches of Gaza. They would set it up. They wouldn't have troops on the ground, but the U.S. military would use that as a way to get aid in. Do you think that is a way? I know this is weeks away, but do you think that could be a way to deliver aid at scale? And if the U.S. military is delivering the aid, it might alleviate some of those security concerns that Israel has about the trucks going in. I'm an amateur at this, but that seems potentially hopeful to me if it gets running. What's your sense?
Well, my sense of it is, again, we welcome all countries to try and think of alternatives to get aid inside, but Palestinians inside Gaza don't have weeks. They're running out of food right now. And so, yeah, while this might be a possibility down the road, that might be too late. And so I think where countries really need to go is to put more pressure on Israel to open those crossings and stop obstructing the aid delivery that is ready to go. We have the equipment, we have the supplies, we just need to be let in.
Really, there's no substitute for convoys of trucks going in at scale, is what you're saying?
There isn't, unfortunately.
Diana Sarosi with Oxfam Canada, thank you so much for your time today.